left, right.
You are in for a treat tonight. We are talking about narcissism and borderline personality disorder, specifically narcissistic personality disorder. We're comparing the two. A narcissist is not always somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder. These are complicated mental disorders. Listen on, learn the facts, and diagnose your friends. See you on the other end. This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
Of course, let's go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, we are live. Welcome to Sip Talk, episode 181. My name is Justin DiGiulio, out of my basement in New Jersey, joined by James, the Bosnator Boswell, out of sunny South Carolina. James is a philosopher, a professional referee, a bartender, and most exciting of all, an accountant. James, how's life down in sunny South Carolina?
Things are pretty good down here right now. We're finally into what I would call late spring, where it's nice and warm every single day. We were supposed to get a whole bunch of thunderstorms today, but they dodged my house. Like the storm was all in one line, and then it gets to my house and splits up, and I was really disappointed.
Well, you must not have to worry about flooding. That's
No, also when I bought a house, so for the past 13 years, every single time that it's been hurricane season, I've always gotten excited anytime a hurricane spins up and looks like it might have a chance to hit Charleston, and people would always look at me like I was crazy.
yeah.
Um, and they're like, "Wait, you want it to hit here?" I was like, "Oh, totally." Wait, no, you don't want it to hit here. No, that's not what I'm saying. I want it to hit here.
Okay, so give your rationale. It's good then.
Well,
Why do you
hurricanes
want?
are fun.
I mean, they're exciting, especially if you're not in line with the potential damage, which it sounds like you have not been for the last 13 years.
I've been through, I'd say, two or three actual decent hits. Probably the biggest was Hurricane Matthew in 2016. But for me, they're the closest I'm going to get to like a snow day.
Ah,
Um,
fair enough. Just slightly
but
more destructive than a little blizzard.
true, but I don't know. The actual day of like the hurricane hitting is cool because you're seeing weather that you will never see anywhere else with crazy winds and crazy rain. And like people said, well, that's just because you rent that you're like so in favor of hurricanes. Like once you own a property, your attitude's gonna change. um, I can say as a homeowner, uh, nope, attitude remains the same.
Well, I'm glad that you've stuck to your camp there. So look, uh, I was talking about current news. I thought you were going to segue into our topic at hand, which was Johnny Depp being, well, he's not on trial, actually. He's the plaintiff, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the topic tonight that we're talking about is actually narcissism. We're going to drag borderline personality disorder into it because we're going to be discussing narcissistic personality disorder, not so much narcissism in general. So, outside from the weather, and when you dodged a little bit of rain tonight, um, and I don't know much about the Johnny Depp trial. Like I said right before we got on air, I've caught maybe a minute or two of it uh, every other day for the last couple of days. You want to lay on me what you heard, and then
Well,
we'll
I
springboard
think
to the
it's
topic.
important
Yeah.
to go back to how this started, which was a couple years ago. His wife, or I think they were married, Amber Heard, published an op-ed in the New York Times, I believe, alleging all sorts of abuse from him. And as a result of that, he basically like all of his movie contracts canceled, and he hasn't really worked since I believe 2017 or 2018. Um, and he is now suing her for defamation because he alleges that he was not the abuser in the relationship; it was her.
Which is very interesting spin on things, and what we're seeing at this trial, which we're watching, some of us are able to watch live, is that these are two pretty high profile people, and this was not a great marriage. And it sounds very much from what I have gathered that she is pretty crazy. And that, he may be a bit of crazy also, but he also plays a drunken pirate as his primary role for the last
Well,
dozen movies that he's done. So,
from the clips that I've seen, and granted, I'm probably like the sources that I'm getting these videos from are probably biased in favor of Johnny Depp, so they're probably going to be more likely to show me clips that are favorable to him.
I,
But
I I feel like that's a lot of what we're seeing, anyways. And I'm trying to, when I'm watching this stuff, I'm trying to look for the bias, and you're not catching everything. So,
yeah, and I don't have the patience or mental fortitude to listen to the entire trial as it's going on live, because it's not pleasant listening material.
it's very slow and drawn out and boring. And listening to Johnny Depp speak without written lines that are rehearsed is actually really painful, I found.
Well, it depends. I think I've seen some clips where I think he actually comes off very well.
Did you catch the one where basically she accused him of pouring a mega pint of wine, and the prosecutor, the defense attorney said, could you define, how large a mega pint of wine is? And he's like, well, it's a pint, and while that might be a lot of wine, I think in that situation it was warranted. Something along those lines.
Yeah. Um, and I think there are a couple of things that are important about this case. The first is I'll admit my bias right now and think that he is largely right, that he was the victim of abuse and that she was the abuser. Like, that's my opinion. I think that she's in the wrong here more than he is.
Well,
Um,
okay.
and I think that this case is useful because it highlights something that society kind of ignores, which is men that are victims of domestic abuse. Now, this
Well,
is not to diminish women who are victims. I'm saying no one should be victims.
no one should be victims, but also the spotlight is usually focused in one direction when the direction shouldn't be focused at one gender or the other. It should
Well,
be focused on basically on the abuse problem
well,
and
I think
abusive behavior.
men probably commit domestic abuse more than women as a percentage of
And
relationships. Like,
probably more physical
for sure.
than emotional.
But just because men have been and continue to be historically more guilty of it than women doesn't mean that when a man is a victim of it, it should be dismissed or ignored or made fun of, because nobody should be the victim of abuse. And there was a line in the proceedings, a recorded phone call between Depp and Heard, where, and I'm not getting the quote exactly right, but she basically says, go ahead and take this to a trial. They're going to, like, what jury is going to convict like a woman as being an abuser? You're a man.
I
Like,
would. I didn't actually hear that, but
like,
somebody
I'm
else
not
told me
getting the
about
quote
it.
exactly right,
No,
but that
but
was the implication. Was like, you think that you're going to have any success in a court with this one? I'm a woman. Like, no, like, women don't get.
it's basically taunting him. Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
somebody else told me about this. So I think also what may come to light is the fact that some relationships that are doomed before they ultimately people totally separate, things get really, really shitty.
Can I
And
put one more point out there when you're done?
yeah, but the general point that I'm making is y- people need to know when to exit a relationship and when to salvage a relationship. And there are certain points if a relationship gets so bad that it cannot be salvaged. So a sinking ship, you have to decide whether or not you want to jump ship or you want to start bailing out buckets of water. And when it gets to the point where it is abandoned ship time and you're just standing on the ship arguing, you're both going down, and it's very painful for both of you.
Um, so one other point, because I don't know, it's certainly not in the level of like Depp and Herds, but like the more I think about it, the more I was part of an abusive relationship a couple years back, and I was the one that was being abused. And like the more I think about it, the more it checks the boxes. but I was kind of in denial about it at the time. And I think that it's important to note that like the person who's being abused, sometimes the way that they react to the abuse, if you only look at their behavior, if you ignore the triggering events that caused it, their behavior can look like abuse too because they're responding to being abused. And so you have to look at who was the one causing these problems. And I like when I look at what's like the descriptions of some of the exchanges between like Depp and her, like she threw a can of mineral spirits at his face and it hit him like right between the eyes and stuff. And like when something like that happens, it's really difficult to not react at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And even if you react verbally or and like the things that you're going to say, if you take them out of context, are going to sound like abuse. But why did those happen? And I think that's something that's really important to see is that like just because both parties do something wrong, you have to look and say who was the one that was instigating it, because that's where the abuse
Well,
is the
yeah.
one bringing it.
Where did it start? And a lot of times it is the other party coping. So look,
And I know that's childish of like, but you started it. But in this particular case, it actually really matters.
yeah, but it's also it's being perpetuated also by the other party, and that's where my point is. That's where it gets messy. And at a certain point in time, one of the parties needs to jump ship in order for both people not to go down.
Well, and you talked about how Johnny Depp was a victim of abuse when he was a child. And so if you were abused as a child, you are more susceptible to end up in in an abusive relationship because that's during your formative years, that's how you learned how relationships work. And so you just assume that like the abusive relationship that you're in as an adult is how relationships are. So it's a lot harder for someone to leave an abusive relationship, one, than people just think in general, but two, especially if they were raised as a child in an abusive relationship.
That's very funny because I had a friend who had from my perspective, a very mutually abusive and verbally abusive relationship. And I witnessed his relationship, and I also knew that for several years prior to that, his parents were divorcing. And I said, "Hey, dude, like this is not. I'm witnessing you in your relationship, and you are both abusive and you're just ripping each other apart. Every time I'm with you guys are ripping each other apart. Like this is not a healthy relationship. The only reason I can't imagine, like I've sat at dinner and I wanted to leave the dinner, and you go home and let that continue, and you wake up the next day and let that continue. The only reason I could ever imagine this is because you think this is okay in a relationship, and I imagine that the relationship that in your formative years that your parents are divorced, and there's a lot of children of divorced parents, your parents are divorced, so I can imagine that in your formative years you witnessed a lot of similar stuff. But my friend, that's not acceptable for a relationship that's going to last, and that's not a healthy relationship. All right, so I want to get into narcissism to start. You got some information on borderline?
Yeah,
Okay,
I've got lots.
okay, cool. Now, is borderline, is that DSM-5?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
So
it's in DSM-5. I've got the DSM-5 criteria along with a couple other things.
cool, because I'm going to go over the DSM-5 criteria for narcissism first. But
I
when we're
think we
talking
should
about
go through both of their criteria one after the other so that people can see how similar they are in terms of their diagnostics.
run through the full list,
Yeah,
and
like you
then
tell,
okay,
and then
okay,
we can
cool.
go
So
into more because, like, a very quick aside,
yeah,
a friend of mine in the refereeing community dated a girl that was borderline, and after they broke up, um, I was telling him because like I knew her as well, and like I've driven to college soccer games with just her and I in the car, and I've had like long talks with her,
yeah.
and she reminded me of a girl that I dated that was also borderline. So like when I met her, I was like, no, this is not narcissism. This is borderline. But he was saying, yeah, if there was ever somebody that like had narcissistic personality disorder, it was her. And I said, you're close.
You're close, and they are close, but there are some major differences. So, just to set everybody straight, DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So, it has to fit this classification to be classified as a DSM-5 mental disorder.
Yeah, the DSM-5 is basically the go-to guidebook for mental disorders. Like it's I'm trying to think of like the best comparison. And it's the source.
Yeah, well, it's exactly it's
I guess
your
it's the Bible of psychology.
fair enough. So I read a bunch of articles today about narcissistic personality disorder. A couple of things. What we today think of as narcissism isn't necessarily NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, as classified by the DSM-5. So you can have narcissistic traits. People will call you a narcissist. What we mean when we say narcissist today, we typically mean self-centered and vain, but it goes a lot deeper than simply being self-centered and vain. Also to note, and this is funny because I was reading this article and I realized that it came from 2011. But the article is saying how narcissistic personality disorder is one of the least identified personality disorders. And I'm like, there's no way that's possible. And then I looked at the date, and that was 2011. And I think you'd agree with me that narcissism is very much on the rise over the last decade, and we're seeing a lot more of it. I don't know the influencing factors of why people are more narcissistic today, but and there's a question from Raj: is narcissistic and egotistic the same thing?
No.
And it is not, and that's why I want to get into this DSM-5 list.
Oh, real quick, some statistics.
Yeah.
So borderline personality disorder is about 1.4% of the U.S. population, and nearly 75% of the people diagnosed with BPD are women. Um, Narcissistic personality disorder, experts estimate that up to 5% of
And
people.
that's predominantly male.
I would
Right?
think so. I don't have the stats on the male-female split. Actually, here we go. Prevalence of lifetime NPD was 6.2%, with rates greater for men at 7.7% than women, 4.8%.
Yeah.
So not quite as skewed as BPD, but still more men are narcissistic, more women are borderline personality if you go by the statistics.
Okay, so look, I want to race through the narcissistic. Well, I don't have to race; we have time, but I want to race through the DSM-4 criteria, which is basically not as what's the difference between DSM-4 and DSM-5?
It's just
Is
the
five
addition.
five is just newer, right?
Yeah, so every couple years, or I don't know, it's probably every 10 to 15 years they do a complete revision of it. And so like I think if you were to go back to like DSM-1, like you might find like homosexuality as a mental disorder.
Okay, so
So
I want to hit the DSM-4 criteria because it's a bit more broad, and then I want everyone to be able to see how specific the DSM-5 classification is for narcissism.
oh, so you've got both? You've got the 4 and the 5?
I have the 4 and the 5, and the 5 is actually 2 pages. The 4 is just one, and I've double spaced it, so it's actually easier for me to read here. But
Yeah, and that was one of the major things that they did in the DSM-5 is they tried to say like, here's the list, you must hit X out of these in order to be classified.
yeah, oh, I thought I thought you were going to say here's the thing they did in the 5 is that they double spaced it, so it's
Oh,
easier.
no. But like the 4 was much more broad. It's just like, do you have some of these characteristics? Okay, we can probably diagnose you. Whereas 5 is just like, here's 10, you must have 7 of these 10, otherwise it's no diagnosis.
Okay, so Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, DSM-4 edition. This is the Narcissistic Personality Disorder criteria. A pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, lack of empathy, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. So you have to have at least 5 of the following: grandiose sense of self-importance, for example, exaggerates achievements and talents, and expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. Number 2, preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. 3, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood or should only associate with others that are special or unique or high status people or high status institutions. Number 4, requires excessive admiration. 5, has sense of entitlement. Example, unreasonable expectations of special favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. 6, is interpersonally exploitative. Example, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own goals. 7, lacks empathy. He's unwilling to recognize or identify with feelings and the needs of others. 8, often envious of others and believes that others are envious of him or her. And 9, shows arrogance or haughty behaviors or attitudes. So that actually seems pretty achievable by a lot of people to me.
And if you, I think if you aren't thinking Donald Trump when you read that list, then you need to either watch Trump talk or reread that list.
Oh, I'm actually I'm thinking of a lot of people that I know reading that list, and it's very unfortunate. Now, it's not clinical if you meet 5 or more of those as of the new standards today. But this is back 20 years ago. What they were saying was narcissistic. So to me, it's crazy that there are more narcissistic tendencies today and more narcissists, and yet they've also tightened the criteria to be narcissist. So that simple criteria that may be several people that you know, or several people that you know may have several of these attributes, they've actually made it more difficult to be considered a narcissist today. And we know more people who are narcissistic. So I
Yeah,
think
I
that,
think part of that is like we've just kind of seen a shift in the last decade towards more acceptance of seeking help for these kind of things. So I don't think that the prevalence has really increased at all. I think it's that people have been seeking treatment and then getting the diagnosis.
well, so that's very interesting because when it comes to treating uh, NPD, it's very, very difficult.
Same with BPD.
Most narcissists avoid psychotherapy or any therapy, and they often quit very early on once they feel threatened or uncomfortable. And if we have enough time, I can share there's a 10-stage treatment that's kind of generally accepted for treatment of narcissistic personality disorder. So if we
Let's
have
save
enough
that for the
time, I can
end.
share that. Um, but there's also not many psychotherapists specifically for NPD. And since most people with NPD don't want therapy, uh, it's just very difficult. Remember, narcissists are master manipulators, and those that want therapy aren't seeking therapy for narcissistic personality disorder.
The only
And
reason they're going to therapy is because someone's asking them to and they're using it as a manipulation tool.
yes, and because they're a master manipulator, the therapist may not realize that it's NPD, and they may not be fully forthcoming with fact and specific scenarios and stories when they're with their therapist. So it's just very difficult also to recognize NPD in a therapy setting. So it's usually going to be some type of group therapy. Somebody's saying, "I think you need therapy. I'm going to go with you, and I want to address some of the issues that we have going on, usually marital or relationships and things like that." All right, you
Let's race
ready?
through the DSM-5 stuff, and then
Yeah.
I'm gonna hit the borderline personality because the actual what's funny is that the diagnostic criteria for BPD is very different than NPD, but the way that both of the disorders manifest themselves in real life is very similar.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I'll buy that. Should we? So this is actually through. It's from the DSM. It's from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I got this information through NYU, and then I actually have a couple. What is it? What was that website I sent you? Psychology Today.
Yeah, I've
Uh,
got stuff from the NHS UK, the Mayo Clinic, NCBI.NIH, so something from the National Institute of Health. I got a lot of stuff.
cool. I like Psychology Today, except I read a lot of their articles. All right, so
All right,
let's
so
hit.
go ahead and hit your DSM-5, and also if anybody has experience with this and they want to talk about it or just say like what they've seen, like throw out those comments.
Yeah, I'm very curious of some of your stories of having dated or having a close friend or a
or
relative, like a
or if you
parent.
yourself have it.
What is their behavior like? Can these characteristics be seen right away?
Yes, if you know what you're looking for.
All
Um,
right, so well, I'll give you that list, the new list for NPD DSM
yeah,
five criteria.
after we do the criteria, I want to answer that person's question because I can describe what it's like to be around a borderline personality person very well, having
Uh,
dated one.
well, I'm going to try to avoid sharing personal perspective too much on this one, but I can tell you that I'm very close with the narcissistic
Yeah,
personality.
but well,
So
I've known two people fairly closely with BPD, so I can describe what they're like to be around, and it's not negative.
no, and same thing oftentimes with being around a narcissist. A lot of the time, because if it was all negative, these people would push everyone away, which is why there's that manipulative aspect of these disorders, is that they may do some things that really make you feel like shit, but they will bring you back and you will be wanting to come back, which is really weird. It's very odd how these traits manifest themselves and allow themselves to perpetuate in a lasting relationship. So, the essential features of a personality disorder are impairments in personality, self and interpersonal functioning, and the presence of pathological personality traits. To diagnose NPD, the following criteria must be met: significant impairment in person, fucking a, significant impairments in personality functioning manifest by impairments in self functioning, A or B, identity, excessive reference to others for self definition and self regulation, exaggerative self appraisal, inflated or deflated, and it may go between the extremes. Self direction, goal setting is based on gaining approval from others. So you're not setting goals for yourself, you're setting goals for others to notice. And personal standards are unreasonably high in order to see oneself as exceptional, and sometimes too low based on a sense of self entitlement. And you are often unaware of your own motivations. So, either identity or self direction, and impairments in interpersonal functioning, either A or B. So, empathy, impaired ability to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others, excessively attuned to the reactions of others, but only if perceived as relevant to self, or underestimate your own effect on others. And intimacy, relationships largely superficial and exist to serve self esteem regulation, uh, mutually constrained by little genuine interest in others. Uh, okay. Next is pathological personality traits in the following domain: antagonism, characterized by grandiosity, feelings of entitlement, either overt or covert, self centeredness, firmly holding to the belief that one is better than others, condescending towards others. Attention seeking, excessive attempts to attract and be the focus of attention of others, admiration seeking. Next, impairments in personality functioning and the individual's personality trait expressions are relatively stable across time and consistent across situations. The impairments in personality functioning and the individual's personality trait expression are not better understood as normative for the individual's developmental stage or sociocultural environment. There's a lot of multisyllabic words in here. I'm sorry. And lastly, the impairments in personality functioning and the individual's personality trait expressions are not solely due to direct psychological effects of substance, example, drug abuse or medication abuse, uh, or a general medical condition, so severe head trauma. So basically, this person's personality isn't impacted because of their drug use or because of injury.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a mouthful. That was a
Yeah,
lot. Like I said,
I'm gonna go through
multi-syllabic
this
words.
one quickly. So I actually found the 4 and the 5 for BPD, and I think that I just read through 5, and like the differences between the two criteria are very similar to the differences you found in yours, where one is just like hit X number of this list, the other one is more like either or this or that on a whole bunch of different criteria.
Yeah.
I think that the 4 actually does a better job giving a general picture as to what's going on. So I'm
Yeah.
just
Well,
going to read through that real quick, and then I'm going to describe what it's like to be around a BPD person and some like the behaviors that you'll see manifested, and then you can maybe talk a little bit about like the people you know with NPD. So BPD is a pervasive pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships marked by impulsivity beginning in early adulthood, indicated by 5 or more of the following. So 1, chronic feelings of emptiness. 2, emotional instability in reaction to day-to-day events. Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Identity disturbances like markedly or persistently unstable self-image or sense of self, um, impulsive behavior in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. So examples would be like spending a lot of money, like frequent casual sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. So like all kind of, I guess, dopamine activities.
extremes. Yeah.
Yeah. Inappropriate, intense anger or difficult controlling anger. A pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by extremes between idealization and devaluation. And I want to get back to that one when I finish the last
Okay.
2.
Yeah.
Recurrent suicidal behavior or self harming behavior, and transient stress related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So that's just like almost like a psychotic break where you're not really experiencing reality like other people are.
Yeah.
Um, the one that I think is really big that
Is
like
that it? That's a whole list.
that's the whole list. So
Okay.
the pattern of unstable and interpersonal relationships with the extremes between idealization and devaluation. That one I like to describe as like a push-pull, where if they're in a relationship, they're extremely close with the person that they're in a relationship with, and then very quickly they rebound and push that person away, and the cycle repeats. So
Hmm.
like they love the person, then they hate the person. They love the person, then they hate the person. And so the theory behind BPD is that they the person both wants to be accepted and have stable relationships, but has a really deep fear of rejection. And so as they get closer to a person, they're both getting what they want and also getting closer to what they fear, which is that person possibly going away. And so the way that they deal with that is by pushing that person away so that way they're not rejected.
Yeah. It's. I know one person in particular with very severe borderline. I believe their partner knows, but I could be wrong on that.
When it comes to like being around someone that's borderline, like borderline personality people can actually be some of the best people to be around because they desire attention, like they can actually be the life of the party. And I'm not talking about in terms of just like going crazy with drinking or whatever. It's just they can be really entertaining and fun to be around and personable at a party because they're getting that positive attention. But what you'll see is as soon as the attention shifts away from them, just because that's how like things happen at parties is like, all right, we're paying attention to this person. Oh, now we're gonna pay attention to that
Then
person.
then the party's over and it needs to be shut down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It is that now they're all of a sudden mad, and they'll even maybe even blame the other like somebody else who's getting the attention now, and thinking that that person dislikes them, when in reality it had nothing to do with them and everything to
That's
do with
just
just
yeah.
that's how people are.
That's how things.
But
Yeah.
they perceive that any anything that is not beneficial to them must have been a personal slight against them.
Now, do you think both of these are manifestations of low self-esteem? Because I would think low self-esteem
I
could
think
manifest itself both ways,
I think
but they're
with
both.
BPD, the low self-esteem is a consequence, not a cause. The most
Well, but you're
the
making your own life turmoil with borderline.
yeah, but I don't think borderline emerges from low self-esteem. I think low self-esteem happens because of borderline. The most popular theory as to the cause for borderline is that you have like an unstable
Childhood.
childhood
Yeah.
where you didn't get that kind of reassurance that the people that love you will be there for you, and that's where you want that close relationship, but your childhood taught you that that can be taken away, and that really hurts, and so you deeply fear it.
Yeah. I think that's very likely the most predominant cause for BPD. Um, what is your if you had to take kind of a one liner stab, because that's I think a really good one liner stab at one of the biggest causes for BPD. What would you say would be one of the biggest causes for narcissistic personality disorder? And assuming that all of this stems somewhere in childhood, somewhere in a development stage. Because my thinking is this uh, is environmental, so it could have something to do with parenting. It could have something to do with kind of your social
So
exposure.
I would have to guess that NPD stems also from childhood, but instead of having that unstable formational time that causes BPD, I would think that NPD would be caused by parental, by parents not giving the child realistic input as to what they're doing.
Well,
So when if everything the child does is the greatest and the parents tell the kid that they're better than everybody else and the parents cover up for any failings of the child. So like if the parents do the projects for the child and the child gets an A or whatever, like so it's kind of a inflation of the child's self-worth while minimizing the amount of responsibility and work that the child has to put into to achieve what they're achieving. That would be my guess.
I would think there's a disconnect between the actual status of that child and what they're being led to believe their status is. And
Hmm.
I think you're that's a really good example. It's funny because I was watching some like interspace science galaxy thing on YouTube last night, and they were talking about like science fairs. And I was looking at the video that they had. It was kind of like a stock video they had at the science fair, and it was like the fourth graders, and I could see some of them were like some of those fourth grade science projects were in a science fair were blatantly done by the parent, whereas the general quality of most of the science experiments was pretty poor. Some of them were like, you know, giant interplanetary models and things like that. I'm like, there's no way a fucking fourth grader did this shit. But that, when that fourth grader graduates into the real world, they're going to have a disconnect with who they believe they are and and basically what their status actually is.
Especially in your example, if the fourth grader feels like that killer science fair project was their own doing, if the parents make it be like, look at what you did, look at how good this is, instead of look what we did or look at how we worked on this together, it's no, look how good you are.
I think, but
And
that's where I think parenting has a giant role
well, in both of
in
these it
all of this.
does.
Just like Sarah said on I think that's Twitch, overprotection has something to do with it. It's parents giving children an unrealistic idea of who they are in life, and not saying, hey, bud, you're not really good at baseball, so you have two options: you can play soccer, which you're decent at, or you can practice the hell out of baseball.
Yeah, and
But
obviously,
not but
like
not saying,
when
hey,
we're trying to boil these down to just one thing, we're gonna be missing some nuance for sure. But obviously, I think we both agree that like both of these are going to be kind of the foundations for either disorder are planted relatively early on based on how you were parented.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, and I think you and I both got did pretty well with parenting and direction like that. You know, I think
When you
my mom.
compare our upbringing to many others, I think both of us were on like definitely within like probably two standard deviations above the average.
Yeah, I would say so. It's funny because a lot of the time I think oftentimes about like what it was like being and what it is like being my mother's son. And for those people who don't know, my father passed away when I was younger, so it was mostly parenting coming from my mom, and she did a really good job as a single parent, but she built me up really quite a bit. But I think she was also very realistic. Um, with like she was here last the Easter weekend, and she's like, oh, the house looks great, this is great, you're an amazing person, you're an amazing son, hey, you put on a little weight, I can see. And I'm just like, what the fuck was that? It's a fucking jab to the nose.
Well,
But I
lose
think
some weight, fatty.
I think she does a really good job at being super realistic, and also, and I know her role. I am also very aware that her role as a mother um, is to kind of be in my corner the majority of the time. But if I had a bad round, she's going to say, "Hey, you gotta, that was you fucked up there. You got to come back this next round, otherwise you're
And that's a
toast."
critical role of parenting is yes, you need to be supportive to your children, but you also need to be realistic with them when they screw up.
Yeah.
And that
So
doesn't mean over punishing, but it also doesn't mean covering up the problem or making them think that it was somebody else's fault.
I'd like to get into the because I want to talk if we have time. I'd like to get into the article that I sent you, the Psychology Today.
The differences and similarities.
Yeah, but also,
I think that's where we should go next.
yeah, I think so too. But if we have time, I have the 10 stages of treatment for narcissistic personality disorder. And what I wanted to just mention that the treatment for narcissistic personality disorder specifically is Sarah, we'll hit your question 1 second. The treatment for narcissism is really difficult because the therapist can't say you're not special, you're nobody. We got to drag you back down to reality because that's not effective treatment, and it's not going to play out. So, uh, you know,
Well, I
it's
want
more.
to let's. Sarah asks, narcissism is driven by insecurity. Agree or disagree?
That's a really good question because I sometimes there are benefits of certain narcissistic personality traits, like striving to be better, believing that your goals are so much of a higher level, because they can make you work very hard for certain goals, whether they're realistic goals or not. So I think there's a certain drive that can come with narcissism, not always, because some people think that they already have those achievements. Um, and but I think there is so I think there's got to be some insecurity because you have that parent that fills their kid's head like Kanye West with how special a person they are, how they're basically Jesus Christ 2.0. But at some point in reality, you just got to walk into the supermarket and be like, fuck, I only got $35. I don't have any food at home. Like this is reality.
So
I'm not turning, bread into fish and water into wine. This is reality. It's I got $35 and I need a tank of gas and I got to buy groceries. This is reality.
I think my answer to Sarah's question would be it depends. I think it could be driven by insecurity, or it could be like, I think at its most extremes, narcissism is an insecurity. That these people actually believe that they're better than everybody else and that like they deserve more than that what they get. And all the criteria that you listed, I think at at its worst, narcissism is not about insecurity at all. That narcissism is a lack of insecurity that doesn't that causes you to have an unrealistic image of yourself and how you're viewed by others.
But I think there's some element of insecurity in there, and
I think there can be, but I
and
think it if you boil it down to its core, insecurity gets out.
It could be an ignorance of insecurity as well,
Yeah, I think
but
I would say
that
that
element is still.
it's actually a clinical lack of insecurity.
Um,
Because like some insecurity is healthy. There's a reason why, like, if you think about all the emotions that we have, there's an evolutionary reason for each one of them. Insecurity being one of them.
yeah, very much so.
And
Um,
so, yeah, if you completely lack insecurity, then like yeah, you're probably going to end up with narcissism. So I guess the more I think about it, I'm gonna have to say disagree. It's not driven by insecurity. It's driven by the lack of it.
well, yeah, Marilu Minares on TikTok says that's what they want to cover up, their insecurities. But I don't necessarily know.
No, that's more borderline actually.
Yeah, I would say that would be more borderline. I wouldn't say that would be a trait of narcissism covering up your insecurities. I think there's a lot of your your vision of reality isn't in line with the real reality, and the real reality is your insecurities.
Yeah,
Hey,
and borderline similar in terms of your vision of reality isn't in line with reality, but in a different way, mostly in terms of how you perceive the actions of others in relation to yourself. Whereas with narcissism, you're going to think they just don't see me as great as I am. Like borderline is going
yeah,
to be they did that because they wanted to get back at me for something. I'll give you a quick example. The girl that I was dating, her roommate was someone that she hadn't met before. It was a roommate that she met, let's say,
like
on
Craigslist or
Craigslist.
something. Yeah.
But so it's a and so while I was dating her, her roommate met her brother, and her brother, her roommate and her brother, not the girl that was.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it is South Carolina, but come on. Her roommate and my then girlfriend's brother started dating, and my then girlfriend was very angry about this because she had moved
Of
into
course.
this apartment because she wanted to be on her own and not have her family influence her. And she thought that her brother was dating this girl not because he liked her for any reason, but it was a way for him to get back at her for moving out from like
Yeah,
the family home.
And I'm sure she wholeheartedly believed that,
Oh, she totally did.
which is where that absence of reality happened. It's not she didn't think that because there was any element that was real about that. She thought that because that somehow that's what her mind deduced because of this disorder.
Yeah, and like boy was she angry about that.
Just I mean, just like if you are walking down the street thinking people are talking about you, and they're not. One, they don't even know who the fuck you are, and they're not even looking at you. You know,
Yeah, that's more of like a schizophrenic thing,
that's what I was,
paranoia. But
yeah.
yeah, like that's an example of like a borderline personality person thinking that somebody else's actions are related to you and designed to get at you, when in reality they aren't.
Okay, so let's hit the differences list. I'm going to have you read that. I want to ask you real quick though. Are you familiar with imposter syndrome?
Yes.
I like this one. The imposter syndrome is the internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others believe you to be, and that's kind of the almost the reverse. I feel like, or the inverse of
Yeah,
narcissistic
it's
personality disorder.
extremely common for people to experience that right after a promotion.
Yeah, I would be able to understand that completely. All right, so I'm gonna let you hit this list here.
All right, so I want to start. I'm going to go out of order here because I want to go with similarities first, since we spent most of our time talking about differences.
Okay, and this is Psychology Today article by
Yes.
Bill Eddy.
Yeah, so I'll hit. I'll tell you what. Like we'll go three at a time. Oh yeah. So Sarah says imposter syndrome just is like feeling like you were just lucky and not because like you deserve it.
Yeah,
Okay. So similarities between BPD and NPD. Both rely on other people to manage functions that most of us are able to manage them ourselves. People with BPD look to others to help manage their moods, while people with NPD want others to prop up their self-esteem. Both live in alternative realities in which feelings create facts, That's definitely true. Like it's different in terms of how it manifests, but yeah, that's completely true.
Well, the example you just gave.
Yeah, but also with like narcissist of like how important I am, look how great I am. I feel great, therefore I am great.
Yeah.
All right. Both project their feelings of badness onto other people who become the target of blame. And you can look at this of like, we'll go with the story from my ex girlfriend, and we'll go with look at any time that Trump has said something bad about somebody else when in reality it was his screw up.
Yeah. You know, let's just go look back. There's something about pulling other people down and assigning the negatives on other people, and I think that's where you could think self-esteem has something to do with it.
Well, for narcissists, it's to preserve their greatness. Is
Yeah,
other people are terrible, therefore I'm great. Whereas with BPD, it's other people are terrible, and I don't know what the reason is though.
but for whatever reason that's convenient for whatever fact that you've constructed. But I
Yeah.
think that's where self-esteem gets into it. Is people with low self-esteem oftentimes pull others around them down. And if you and not because you are narcissistic, but if you are narcissistic, you're pulling others down because it can't have anything to do with you. Whereas oftentimes you just have low self-esteem, you'll pull others down for whatever reason.
All right, you want to hit the next three?
Okay, let's see.
Both blame everybody.
Yeah, I got that. Both blame everyone but themselves. Neither will admit they were wrong or made a mistake. So,
Yep.
you
Again,
hit
for different
Trump.
reasons.
Yeah, but you hit Trump with that as well.
Yep.
Both can be critical and judgmental, and both must be right at all times. Neither will take responsibility for their words or actions.
Yep.
That's very interesting. And both carry grudges and see themselves as victims, and expect loved ones to agree, which is really, this is a weird trait. So what your perception is that you're the victim, and you hold this grudge against somebody else, but then you expect the people that you care about and that care about you to just blindly agree with you. That's a really funky aspect of that one.
Yeah. And again, it's like the blaming everybody but themselves. It's all of these are done for different reasons, and it just results in the same behavior.
Do you want to?
All right, so
okay, the next three.
yeah, so both are unwilling to listen to what they don't want to hear. Kind of goes along with blaming everybody but themselves.
That's a again. This is what separates this person from someone without these disorders. Is that you have to hear what's out there in reality. But you
Yeah.
have to, you have to. My mom telling me, just you put on a little weight. I'm like, no shit. Clearly, I have. Thank you for drawing both of our attentions to that.
Both may become exceedingly jealous over little or nothing, and both feel a great sense of shame, which they cover over with layers of self-deception. Both lie. Both need plenty of attention. Um, Both try to control other people in their environment to feel safe. People with BPD use it to manage their own emotional stability, while NPD use it to prop themselves up.
Yeah, the emotional instability for the BPD is you see those extremes. You see the extremes of their emotions, whereas I think most narcissists don't have emotion at as deep of a level.
No,
Right.
no, I don't think so at all. I'm sorry, I'm agreeing with you.
No, I don't think so. But I
No,
agree.
no, I was going
But
to say
no,
like I don't think so at all. As in like yeah, like I don't think that they
the
have the emotions.
the borderline need people to control their emotional stability because their emotional stability swings so much.
Well,
The
it's also because
narcissist,
their self-worth is kind of pinned to others, and that's the cause of the problem.
yeah, and then the narcissist, they don't have their emotions don't swing as vastly. So in this case, they need to prop their self esteem. All
Let's
right,
just hit the last one. Like both see things in black and white with no shades of gray.
yeah, and that's I think that's a big take home from the whole conversation that we're having is that we're talking about clinical levels of borderline, clinical levels of narcissist. So you yourself need to understand that this is not just black and white, that there are some shades of gray in here, and the darker it gets in one direction or the other, then that person's more likely to have this disorder. And somebody who has several of these classifications or several of these traits, that's not great, but it doesn't mean that they have a clinical mental disorder. But it does mean that maybe they could benefit from some counseling.
Yeah. Real quick, we only got 5 minutes left, and I still want to hit the differences, but the opposite of imposter syndrome is also worth mentioning, the Dunning-Kruger effect, where like the more you know about something, the more you're going to like hedge your bets and express less confidence in your conclusions. Whereas like the less you know, the more sure you are of something,
Yeah, but
because
that's
you're too poorly educated on the topic to recognize the nuances that you're missing. And
didn't we
so
discuss Dunning Kruger like
we might have.
a couple of episodes ago? But basically, Dunning Kruger, if you don't know anything about something, you think you know all about it.
Yeah, it's if you know nothing about it, then you're
Yeah.
going to say you know nothing. If you know a little bit about it, you're going to think that you're an expert, and then as your expertise grows, your confidence actually declines when you realize how complex it is. And it's only once you become like a true expert of it that confidence starts to come back because you actually understand it very well.
Yeah, I feel like that's me working on cars or doing, but also I know going into things that there is such thing as this Dunning Kruger bias. So I often underestimate the complexity of many tasks. Just everybody does.
Hmm.
That's why it's like a thing. Um,
Unless you're a real expert on it.
unless you are a real expert, but unless you're if you're an expert, it's not going to be new to you.
Right.
So when I'm changing the wheel bearings on the car, I'm thinking, well, this isn't actually just. I don't know if we mentioned this. I told you last week I changed the wheel bearing. It took me fucking 3 days because I had to keep running out for tools. None of the stores had the tools. I'd spend hours going store to store, auto part, trying to find these tools. Now I went and did the opposing wheel, and it took me like 3 hours. It was
Yeah,
just,
because you knew what to do.
I knew
You
what I
knew
was
where to.
doing. Yeah.
All right, let's hit these differences. And also, Sarah says they both like to be in control and have the upper hand. I would agree with that.
Yes, and both use trauma bond.
Trauma as a way to bond, or like, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, well
But let's
let's
hit these
look.
differences since we only got 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm just gonna lead. I'll read the first three sentences at least. For people with borderline, the major issue is fear of abandonment. People with narcissism, the person's major issue is feeding their ego through their supply. For people with borderline, their emotions are variable and very intense. I actually just mentioned that a second ago.
Hmm.
For people who are narcissistic, their emotions are shallow except for rage. That's interesting.
Trump.
Uh, People with borderline have a fear of both abandonment and engulfment. So somebody getting too close, they don't like. People with narcissism may have a pervasive sense of grandiosity.
Yeah. So people with BPD can have suicidal thoughts or self-harm, whereas people with MPD have a sense that they are entitled to the best of everything, and they don't have to follow the rules that other people do. NPD, you're almost never going to see self-harm.
No, because they think they're the king. So why would they
Yeah.
tear themselves down?
Yeah.
Sarah, we'll hit your comment in a second. Let's read through these real
Yeah.
quick.
People with BPD outwardly exhibit feelings of abandonedness, woundedness, or vulnerability, whereas people with NPD have a tendency to exploit others. You're never going to see somebody with NPD act vulnerable. Unless they think that unless they're using it to exploit.
I was just going to say that they may play that card briefly and use it to allow someone to lure someone to get closer to them, but then they would never truly be vulnerable. So it wouldn't be a true vulnerability.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody with borderline is going to actually have those feelings of abandonment, woundedness, or vulnerability, and they're going to expect you to come in to regulate their emotions.
Yeah. I'm skipping the next one because I don't agree with it. Next one. So the next one I do agree with. People with BPD have an unstable sense of self, whereas people with NPD probably have too stable a sense of self because they've
Yeah.
got this strong sense of superiority.
Yeah, and I think these are, I really like these differences because they really draw the line, so people don't go
Yeah,
too.
because you can see the similarities and the differences and like why the cause matters so much.
Yeah,
So BPD, chronic feelings of emptiness, whereas people with NPD are not going to feel empty and they're actually going to have very little empathy for others. And people with BPD might have a genuine interest in other people. They're just unable to maintain those relationships because of their fear of abandonment and that whole push pull thing that I talked about.
all
Whereas
right.
people with NPD don't care about learning others because they're better.
All right, that's going to wrap the live aspect of this episode. We're off Instagram. Don't forget subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe
Hit
on audio
Sarah's comment real
podcast.
quick.
We're out of time, but we're going to stay live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter. We're just losing the Instagram stream. So adios, IG. And we will take a quick break, just a few seconds. And we will continue our conversation. I think what we need to do next is continue the conversation about the treatments, and then we'll call it from there. How's that sound?
Yeah, go ahead and hit Sarah's comments since that's been sitting
Okay,
out there and it's good.
so we got those, and actually now's a really good time to share that you can catch us live Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8:30 p.m., roughly 8:30 p.m. On all social media platforms: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch. We're live there. However, we actually edit and publish this podcast on YouTube, so you can watch us on video on YouTube, or you can listen to us on any audio podcast platform. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, I think Anchor, whatever the podcast platforms are, you can catch us on all of those. So make sure that you guys follow us there. Right now, we are still live. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, and TikTok. And we're going to continue talking about the 10 stages of treatment for NPD, Narcissistic Personality Disorder. Before we do, we're going to hit a comment from Twitch. This is Sarah _ AL999. And Sarah had a couple comments about trauma bonding, and she's defining the trauma. Said she pulled this from Google. Trauma bonding involves cycles of abuse. Following an abusive incident or series of incidents, the perpetrators will often offer a kind gesture to recover the situation. A period of relative peace can follow before tensions start to rebuild and the abuse inevitably starts again. So I think that would be a commonality between borderline and narcissism. And, creating that trauma to basically lure that person in. Just like when you're fishing, you can kind of let the line out or let some tension out, and then you let it out a little bit, and then you tighten that line and pull them back. I think that's kind of the
Yeah,
same
you set
idea.
the hook.
Yeah, and exactly. And I've been in that situation, James. It sounds like you've been in that situation.
Yep.
And the thing about people with these personality disorders is, sometimes they're in pain, but oftentimes you can really have a bond with them. And unfortunately, with the narcissist, they will have less of a bond with you. But oftentimes that borderline person will have a real deep need for you in their life and a real deep bond, but their personality disorder, it's basically like trying to snuggle with a porcupine. Like that porcupine may want to snuggle with you, but it's just incapable and it's not going to happen. And you're both going to end up getting, it's
Wills.
just bad. Yeah. It's not good. I'm going to I'll share this article with you, James, real quick. What's the best way to get it to you?
Drop it in the private chat.
Okay, let me do that. And it's coming your way. This is also Psychology Today, which is a website I enjoy. There's one that I subscribe. I actually pay for a subscription for. I don't think it's Psychology Today, but it's a good psychology bunch of articles. Anything you want to add before we just hit this list? What are you drinking, by the way? Because it looks like
Bush ice again.
Bush ice. All right. I had a nice icy cold Corona we came on air. I had to crack it pretty quick on. It had this nice frost on the outside of the bottle. That was nice.
Have I told you the worst beer ad I've ever seen?
I think you have, but I'd love to hear you remind me what it was.
It was for Corona Light, which is a terrible beer, and it's a commercial where there's, I don't know, let's say it's Miami. There's a rooftop party going on, and like the camera's kind of floating above, showing a whole bunch of people on a rooftop partying and having a good time. And like the camera zooms out a little bit, and now you get to see like another rooftop right next door where people are also partying. And coincidentally, everybody in both rooftop parties are drinking Corona Light, and like the people from building one like kind of raise their beers to building two in a toast. And then the camera pans out a little bit more, and it just says Corona Light. It only gets better. And I thought that's an unintentionally honest description of your beer. If you're drinking Corona Light, your night can only get better.
Yeah, it's pretty bad at that point in time. You've actually mentioned that before on this podcast. All right, I want to hit this list and move on because I want to put some fucking hydrocortisone and lotion on my body. I told you about the poison ivy.
Yeah.
I am fucking dying. Like literally, I'm a mess.
Yeah, you look like a leper.
I feel like a leper. I almost took the day off of work just to sit at home with shorts on and just cover my body with that calamine lotion. But I couldn't, in good conscience, take the day off to sit at home naked, lotion on my body. So,
Oh, when you describe it like that.
well, look. So here's what happened because I thought more about. We moved all these weeds, and I showed you last week the vines that were on these trees.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't realize that while my friend Bruno was chopping the vines out of the tree and throwing them in a pile, the pile was being raked up. I was loading this pile. I had short sleeves on, but gloves on. And I was grabbing bushelfuls of sticks and leaves and throwing them in the back of the truck. So I had all this shit against my chest is all fucked up too. I had all this shit against my arms and my chest. And then I was taking it, throwing it in the truck. And then I was getting in the flatbed of the truck that was overflowing. So it was up to my waist basically. And I was kicking it and shoveling it out of the back of the truck. So I all the way up my legs, up to my knees, even though I had jeans on, they were just covered in this oil from poison ivy plants. And I have crazy poison ivy all over my body. It's like a weird freak out of having fucking the red ants that you had, the fire ants all over your body, just constantly nibbling and biting on you. It's really bad.
So I think the only difference is, like, for one, mine was nowhere near as bad, but like fire ants will like swell up really bad. So like not only will you have the itching and like the oozing from the actual sores, but like the day after I got bitten up, it was hard for me to walk. My feet were so swollen from the bites.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a little bit of swelling in some of the really gnarly parts.
Yeah, like
but
you know,
not
like if you sprain an ankle or something, it gets super swollen and like it hurts to walk. Not
no,
just
but you're
because of
talking
the
about
injury.
you're talking about like bee stings, like where it swells around the area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh.
So imagine having like 15 bee stings all around your ankle.
Yeah.
Like they didn't hurt. Like a bee sting hurts when it immediately happens. Like these, like when fire ants bite you, it doesn't really hurt that bad. Like you know you've been bit, but it's not like that searing pain of a bee sting. It's just like, yeah, this is gonna be annoying later. And sure enough,
I think in the beginning of the pod, you probably saw me. I have this Benadryl spray. I was spraying my arms. The problem is, I want to wear a shirt for the podcast. So as soon as we wrap, I am ripping my shirt off and spraying this shit. I don't know if you can see me. I've been itching the whole time we've been on air. I am dying. I want to do a whole episode to just warn the world or the 8 people that will watch it about about poison ivy, because the world is really out to fucking kill you, and poison ivy is a good example. So look, I want to talk about.
Don't read about the gimpy tree in Australia then.
Why does that just basically paralyze people?
You can read about it later, and we can talk about that in the same vein as poison ivy.
All right. So look, there's 10 stages of therapy for narcissistic disorders. The biggest issue is getting into the therapy as a narcissist, as somebody with NPD. That is the most difficult part about actually seeking therapy. Most people with NPD are never going to step foot in the therapist's office or telehealth video calls. So
Yeah, why would I need therapy? I'm good.
I'm awesome. I'm awesome. I'm beyond good. I'm better than you are.
Yeah.
That's the narcissist approach. Um, so you want to go back and forth? I'll read number one. You do number two. We'll
Yeah,
go.
let's
Right
hit these quick.
Okay. So symptom relief or appeasement. Most clients with NPD do not enter therapy in order to reflect or change. They usually come in to get relief from unpleasant feelings and symptoms or to please someone who's important to them, who's told them to get therapy. Some leave as soon as they feel better or the other party has been appeased.
So, avoid future pain. If they're at all capable of self-reflection, they may continue long enough to understand their triggers and develop a plan that will help them avoid future pain. It's still all about them at this stage, but it's getting them to understand other people's impact on them.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is probably teaching empathy skills, right? Like and having a conversation about empathy and see what's lacking. So stage three, identify their coping mechanisms. Uh, so this is written in first person perspective by the author. In this stage, I'm helping people understand and identify their primary defense patterns. It may involve looking at their childhood situation and how they learn to cope with it. It's still fairly easy because it can be explored without them feeling judged in most cases.
Yeah. So, once you identify their coping mechanisms, stage 4 is create new ones. Now that the person knows what they do and why they do it, the old narcissistic strategies aren't just going to disappear. So you need to start discussing other ways that they can meet their needs that are more constructive.
I I think that for the most part at this point in this treatment, you're not pushing people so much away. Like you're not you run into that narcissist. Say, oh, these are some things that you do that may not be healthy. And you're doing this. You just told me that this happened in your childhood, so maybe you do this to deal with it. Here are some other things that you could do to deal with it. So I think a good approach could be very beneficial for the patients. Number 5 is to form new habits. So most narcissistic coping mechanisms can be viewed as habits that are encoded in the brain through neuronal connections. The basic goal now is twofold: inhibit the old habits, substitute more desirable patterns. If this is done a few hundred times, the new method eventually gets coded in the brain. The older narcissistic pattern of neural connections weakens through the lack of use, and now the new coping mechanisms become the automatic default pattern. That's basically habit building.
Yeah. So this one I think is really important. So stage 6 is impact on other people. So most of the time clients with NPD can't seriously consider their impact on other people until they have these newer coping mechanisms in place. Otherwise they'll feel too much shame and they might just bail out of the therapy. So you need, like, before you can even get these people to think about how their actions impact others, they need to have like 5 stages of therapy first.
Yeah, that's why I said up until stage 5. Like this is pretty. You're not like hitting any wounds. You're not. You're not. There's no real pain.
Yeah.
But
But
once somebody understands how they're causing pain on other people in a personalized context,
yeah, like
that's where it could become painful.
if you bring up their impact on other people too early, you're risking them bailing on the therapy because they're going to think that you're full of shit, or you're going to like shatter their entire worldview, and you're going to do more damage than the therapy. Like you're going to do more harm than good through the therapy.
Yeah. Um, all right.
So
So
7.
examining their impact on other people. Number 7.
No, that was number 6. Number
Yeah,
7's
yeah.
you.
No, I'm saying number 7, focus on childhood pain. At this stage, the clients are calmer and their life is generally calmer. They have learned what type of things trigger them and they have developed more productive ways to cope with them. Now, some of their defenses against shame are less necessary. Painful traumas from the past start to take center stage in the therapy. If all goes well, some healing takes place, And in the process, they develop some emotional empathy for themselves as a child, so they can understand how they were feeling as a child and understand kind of what was affecting that. They also start to develop the capacity to form stable, realistic, integrated images of themselves, and this allows them to see other people in a more integrated way as well. It's not uh, other people aren't all good or all bad.
So, stage 8 is kind of a tough one. That's update the inner voice. Before they can develop emotional empathy for other people, most people with NP need to be able to empathize with themselves. Quite early in therapy, the therapist talks about how children automatically internalize their understanding of how their caregivers saw them and their caregivers' ideas about right and wrong, and also their ideas about what deserves praise and blame. And so they need to kind of think about what does their inner guiding voice sound like just to them, not even to anybody else. Like, do you like the tone of your inner voice? Is it sweet or is it harsh? Is it scary? Is it fair? Is it reliable? And once they kind of talk about what their own inner voice sounds like, then you need to then you can start working on it. Like
This
in
is
making the
deep. This is pretty deep, I feel
yeah,
like.
this one sounds like it would probably be the hardest step to work on.
Well,
Because
hopefully you have the momentum from the former 7 steps.
yeah,
But I
but
mean, but think about your own inner voice. What is your own inner voice saying or doing? Is it disqualifying, actions of other people's attitudes? Like what what is the tone of that voice? And I think that's what these questions are. I'll let you read the rest of the questions, but
I'm gonna skip over them in the interest of time. But um, like I think the last paragraph. So you can usually tell how harsh someone is with themselves by listening to how harsh they are with others. Inner harshness is proportionate to outer harshness. So blaming and judging other people is a way to redirect their harsh inner critic outward, and that helps protect that narcissistic view of themselves.
next step number 9, empathy
Real
for,
quick,
yeah.
Sarah says that so Rosh was right. She's taking a mental health. She's taking classes for a mental health degree for as a registered nurse. So that's why she came off as knowledgeable as she clearly is.
All right. Well, Sarah, make sure you find us on YouTube and the audio podcast platform. Subscribe. We would love your input in the future, especially when it comes to psychology topics, especially narcissism. This is our second episode we've done on narcissism. Today, we are comparing it to borderline personality disorder. So make sure you subscribe. Would love to hear from you again in the future.
Might be a
Uh,
good guest if we got a right topic.
yeah, especially if she gets her degree. But even in the pursuit of the degree, I'd love to hear what she's learning about. Let me read stage number 9, empathy for other people. Once they understand their own pain and have their harsh, devaluing inner voice more under control, they can start to look outward at other people. Generally, their first real emotional empathy for other people is evoked by someone who meets the following conditions. So I think this should be underlined. Their first empathy for someone else is someone who is no threat to them, someone who reminds them of themselves, uh, and the person is being traumatized or was traumatized in a way that was similar to their trauma earlier in their life.
So it's kind of like hold up a mirror, but not actually a mirror.
Yeah, you have someone who is able to mirror your background, and if all goes well, some of the clients will continue to slowly expand their capacity for empathy.
Makes me think of a famous case, a famous psychology case or psychiatry case, where in a mental hospital, there were 3 patients that all thought that they were the reincarnation of Jesus. And so what the doctors did is they put them all in the same room.
I like that. Did you ever see that movie called Awake?
No.
Oh, that's a really good one. I don't know who the actor is in it, but it's from like the 80s, I think.
Is that
Robin
about
Williams.
like being in a coma and like still being aware?
Well, not necessarily being aware. Your brain's actually mostly off. But what they could do was they could bring your brain back. And with a certain drug, they were able to wake you up. The problem is that the drug basically had a certain half-life that was diminishing over time, and they couldn't keep the people awake. But it was people who've been in a coma for 40 years came out of the coma.
And is this fictional or is this
No,
based on like?
it's a true story, and they were basically catatonic, and they came back to life. Just really, and they realized this very strangely, that their reaction part of their brain was still there, so you could throw a ball at somebody who was catatonic, and they would catch it. Yeah, so it's this weird kind of like lizard brain was active, and I don't know. They like tried some experimentation. It's
Comas
a
are
cool movie.
something that I have like virtually no understanding of. Like the whole concept of a coma is just wild to me.
It's it is an aspect of neuroscience that is totally baffling. A lot like dreams, except I think we understand more about dreams than we do about comas. You want to hit
Oh,
the
one
final
thing,
one?
one
Yeah,
cool
go
thing
ahead.
about dreams that I heard about. So like when you're having a dream, like like your mind is doing two things. Like there's one part of your mind that's doing the dreaming and like creating the events or whatever, and then there's like a different part of your mind that's actually
Comprehending it.
like reacting to it. So
Yeah,
it's like you've got your mind and like imagine two people in your mind. One person's up on stage doing something and the other person is sitting in the audience being like, "Man, this is wild."
that's your cognitive portion of the brain is the one that's like interpreting what's happening on the
Yeah,
other
but
end.
it's funny to me that like the brain is one thing and like it's doing two things at once. It's creating something and simultaneously reacting with surprise to what it's creating.
It's really strange, and it has a lot to do with your memory and how you form memories and what gets reinforced in your memory. It's really it's fucking wild. The fact that we need to sleep as humans. That we could do a whole episode on the sleep stuff. Let's the movie, by the way, thanks to Rosh, said the movie is called Awakenings. Robert De Niro is the patient who comes back to life, or comes back to awareness, and Robin Williams plays the doctor.
Oh, and now we know why the patient decided to go back to sleep.
All right, let's hit authenticity.
All right, last one. Stage 10 is authenticity. And and this is the from the therapist's perspective. My consistent non-judgmental interest in them and their dropping of their defenses improves our relationship. It can be a reparative emotional experience where they can feel trust and be authentic with me because I have seen their bad side and nothing terrible happened to either of us. They can then take these baby steps forward and try and be more authentic with other people. And if it goes well, their reliance on their old false self diminishes and they can become more spontaneous and joyful.
It's a very tight line to walk, though, because you can't have, as the therapist, you can't have the approach or draw light to the fact that the patient is or has been a shitty person or a manipulative person. You can't just
I
throw
think
the
by the time you
spotlight
get
on that.
to stage 10 that you're going to be able to bring that up a little bit.
I think you're skirting that issue entirely, and that the patient may look back and say, that was not the greatest of me. Let me make
Well, you
some
have to
adjustments
lead them
moving
there. You
forward.
can't say it outright. You have to get them to figure that conclusion out for themselves.
Ah, man, this I think people are just becoming more and more narcissistic, and I don't know.
Well,
We're
you
talking
know
about the
what I
clinical
blame?
definition. We're talking about the clinical definition of the narcissistic personality disorder, and we talked about borderline personality disorder, but that's the extreme. So what's your effectively in closing, what's your thinking here?
Well, if you're saying if we're going to get away from the clinical definition of narcissistic personality disorder and just talk about narcissism in general, like lowercase n narcissism, and its prevalence in society and its probably growing prevalence, um, you know exactly what I'm going to blame.
Social media.
Yeah, because now we have a place where everybody gets their own platform and like gets to advertise what they're doing and like since you're exposed to the world, if you've got 7 or 8 billion people out there, like 100 people seeing something that you do and saying that it's cool, statistically, is the same as 0 people seeing it, but it's 100 people that said that what you just did was cool. So no wonder you're going to think, look, 100 other people thought it was cool. Like, I must be cool. No.
Social media is the weirdest fucking thing ever, you know, because I think about, like, what am I going to post on social media? Like, make sure it looks good. But also, like, for me, social media is a medium to stay in touch with people and to continue to exist. And for certain,
Think
there's
about
some
how other
narcissism
people
behind
use
that.
it.
No, but I'm not saying there's no narcissism behind that. Like, it's self-promotion. And I went to our 10-year high school reunion, for example, and I spent a whole bunch of time, like, just pouring through everybody who had RSVP'd. I went through all their Facebook pages for the last 5, 8, 10 years to see, like, what they've been up to. Now we're actually approaching, like, the 20-year high school reunion.
I might actually go to that one. I passed hard on the 10-year.
Yeah, I'd be down for the 20-year again, but social media allowed
I
me
can
to
tell
kind
you
of
that
do
I
this
will not be
economically.
doing any research on anybody.
Dude, I showed up and I went straight to the bar and I drank a hell of a lot, and then from there we went to another bar. It ended up being a fun night, but
Please tell me you didn't end up going to Ryan's wake.
there's probably a very high probability, but I don't recall Ryan's Wake being the ultimate destination. There was a nice Scott. There was actually a cool bar that was a Scott. It was the basement level of this kind of brownstone bar. It was like a speakeasy type establishment, and it was a Scotch bar. They only served. They probably had a couple of beers, but
Was that in Troy?
it was in Troy. They since closed down.
Was it the place that served pizza?
No, I don't think
Because they had, like,
served
the
pizza.
second floor was like a speakeasy style, and
No, I know what you're talking about. We went there before, right?
Yeah, I've been there a couple times.
Yeah, this is not that place,
Oh,
unfortunately.
okay.
This place was, like, on River Streets, underground, next to, like, Brown's, and next to the Rev
Okay,
Hall.
yeah. All right, so different area.
Yeah. Either way, I think we could shoot the shit a little more, but it's the end of the content that we have
Yeah.
for the topic. I really like talking about narcissism a lot. You know, I work with
Of course you do.
well, I have some personal experience on top of, having maybe some narcissistic tendencies, but also a fair bit of imposter syndrome.
We should say hi to Hazel Tari. She came in late arrival to the stream, but
Nice to have you.
yeah.
And your bunny rabbits. So thank you for that. Thank you guys for joining us on the live cast. Make sure you subscribe on the other platforms, YouTube specifically, because we'd love to keep pumping out this content. We also love your opinions on what we should be talking about. So make sure to throw some comments out there and share with us what you'd like to hear about. On that note, I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to thank Rosh Galeb in the background for sending us your live comments. Despite his dogs eating everything in his apartment alive,
Yeah.
he is typing to us in real time what you are saying to us. So,
And Rosh, I'll see if I can send you the image of the street sign I had made.
on that note, everyone, thanks for coming. Thank you, James. Adios.
Cheers.
All right, that concludes the podcast. Thank you for listening. Let me know in the comments what we got right, what we got wrong, what you disagree with, what you agree with, and just your general philosophy on life. All right, see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.